we've changed the name. It's not the East Coast Recovery Podcast anymore, although it is brought to you by East Coast Recovery. We are now the Altered Attitudes Podcast, which I think's got a nice ring to it. And it's got some roots in AA as well, which maybe you can talk about, Lester, in a minute after I've gone through this intro. So welcome to the Altered Attitudes Podcast. It's brought to you by East Coast Recovery Online, an addiction treatment centre based in the east of England. This episode is sponsored by Rehabs UK, the definitive place to go to find a rehabilitation treatment and advice. So today we're with our first guest, which is Kelly. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Hello.
We've got Lester back again, and my name's Matt. So today we're going to talk about parenting through addiction and recovery. You're a parent, Kelly, unlike me and Lester, and you've been through recovery as well, so you're the perfect person to talk to about this. So I can only imagine the strain that addiction can have on being a parent, and in some ways how parenting has a strain on an addiction. It's kind of like they don't really go too well together, I imagine.
Definitely not.
So yeah, it sounds like an impossible situation, but you're in recovery now and you've been working with Lester for a number of years, so I'd like to hear a little bit about your story together. I understand it's one of trauma, but it's ultimately ended in, a bright future for you as a parent, and things are going really well at the moment, which is fantastic. Although kids are kids and there's always going to be issues.
Less trauma.
Yeah, still trauma.
better kind of trauma.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to hear your story, and maybe to begin with, we can start a little bit with your relationship with Lester, and then we can kind of go back to the beginning from there.
Yeah, sure.
So how did you guys meet?
So I came in as a client to East Coast Recovery back in July 2014. I'd been through a few rehabs before then, and I met Lester during my treatment at East Coast Recovery. So the journey started back in 2014 when I entered the doors of East Coast Recovery, and I don't think I was the model client.
Nope.
No, I definitely came in with a lot of baggage,
Yeah.
a lot of trauma. I'd say 20 plus years of addiction. Having just going through a court case to lose my children while I was in treatment. Absolutely beaten and broken at that point. But I think that was my sixth time in treatment. I'd been through rehabs before since the age of 19, in and out of treatment, which was kind of an escapism thing for me, escaping life and being a parent. It was, pass the kids to other people and disappear because I couldn't really handle my addiction or being a parent.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's how we met in 2014.
So the rehab for you was, at those times, were you trying to get better, or were you just trying to escape the kids?
So I think by 2014, I think I was ready to get well. I think I literally was beaten into a state of reasonableness. I tried my own way for so many years, and I was just incapable of living life on life's terms.
Yeah.
Drugs won out every time in every scenario, came above everything, which is obviously the nature of addiction. So there was partly escapism. I think that in the back of my mind, I thought that maybe going into treatment would stop social services taking my kids. So that was probably in my mind that might be one of the reasons. But I was so used to...
I think the reality was, though, that it was never going to happen, was it, at that point?
No.
Because again, we used to get a lot of people come into rehab for that reason, that they'd like, you go into rehab, you get off the drugs, you get your kids back. That was a condition, but I don't think that was probably in your mind rather than a reality, weren't it?
That was so not the reality.
No,
so not
you
the
weren't
reality.
getting them back.
They absolutely were not coming back. So eventually I went into rehab in the July, and in February the next year it went to court. So I'd done quite a bit of treatment by that time. I'd stuck around. I didn't stick around in all the treatment centres, and there was a letter, I've still got it at home, and social services had said to the judge that my past was so entrenched, there was absolutely no way I was going to remain in recovery. The children had to be placed under guardianship to protect them until the age of 18. So that's, there was, at the beginning trying to go through the process of getting back into rehab. It's kind of like, but then I'll save my kids. It's going to be great. I can be a great mum. I was in the delusion that, I was going to be all right. It was going to be that easy to just get, keep the kids. And because I thought that was really important. As long as I got my kids, I'm all right.
Yeah.
So they were taken away from me officially in February 2015.
What sort of led up to that, Kelly, just a little bit? Because in my mind is like, what would it have been like? What was your life like that, say, the 5 years up to that point? How was it for the kids? What was their life like? What was going on?
So when I hit recovery, when I hit ECR, my children
into this, aren't we?
Go straight in. It's fine. Let's go in. This is the harsh reality of it, and this is what is the message that needs to to be given, really, of what it's really like. So when I reached ECR, so my little boy was 1, my middle daughter was 6, and my eldest was 10. So prior to that, the 5 years, I'm just trying to think back, because it all becomes a blur, really. But it was, so that would be from Taylor being 5. I guess for my eldest at 5 years old, and then her life growing up was, it was a life of worry for her, because she had to take care of me. The thing is, bringing children into addiction, they have no choice but to go along with the carnage. They're part of that carnage, and that's where the trauma comes from, because they're getting dragged along because your drugs, your addiction is going to come before them. That's not your choice. So for them, leading up to coming into recovery this time, it was just absolute madness. They were part of that using environment, so there were drugs in the house, there was the police at the door, there was really toxic relationships they didn't come into any of my decisions. I didn't have the ability to bring them into any choices I was making. I thought that because they had a few clean clothes, because they had a couple of microwave meals maybe, a roast here and there when I had enough money left after spending what I was going to spend on drugs, and they had a roof over their head, I thought I was a really good mum.
So you were sort of capable of cooking and keeping a nice house, generally? I mean, you probably may not have been able to do that, but you had the capability of, without the drugs.
Yeah, because I grew up, I've got a wonderful family. I was so lucky, and I think my kids were lucky too, to have that round them, that they had some normality in my outside family. My mum was a massive part of my life and the kids' life. And so I had some of those skills that were given to me by them. And not everybody has that in life, and I feel so blessed that I did, because I knew some of that, so I knew some of the expectations of being a mum, but it was very, very minimal. Like, emotionally, I wasn't available. But
were they propping up some of the normality, like
absolutely,
in the house with food and coming around helping to sort of take as much trouble as they could?
Absolutely, yeah, because I didn't have the ability. My mum would sail in and clean up sometimes. Lots of people did it, actually. Like I say, I've got a big family, and lots of people would come in and take the kids out of it for a while, take them to do sort of normal things kids should be doing that I didn't really do with them. Come and tidy up the house, make sure there's... By the time the kids came along, I think my parents were more knowledgeable about addiction, and I wasn't getting given cash so freely. They'd become...
they'd figure it out.
They'd figured it out by then, yeah. So, they would come in and do other things that they could do. So I guess there was a bit of that, but... emotionally, when it was when the case went to court for my children, and it was the grounds were emotional neglect. I didn't really understand that, but I definitely do now, because the roles were reversed. My eldest was my carer and her sister's carer, and one thing that stands out is she'll sit there happily and talk about, not happily, but she'll freely, is the word, talk about her memories. Do you remember this, Mum? Do you remember when this happened, Mum? And little things will pop up. I never know when, and it's like, oh, but yeah, I do. And one of her memories and one of mine is that at 7 years old, I remember it very clearly, came in from school, dropped her school bag on the floor and ran up the stairs to go and look in my bedroom to see if there was needles in my bedroom. So that must have consumed her mind while she was at school. You know, and that's quite heart-wrenching for a 7-year-old little girl to have to go through that. And that's just one snippet. So it literally, like, back to your question, Esther, the 5 years was a real double life, me just trying my best to hold it down, but it was spiralling out of control. Toxic relationship.
So you used heroin and crack cocaine?
Heroin and crack, yeah, since the age my late teens, early 20s. Yeah, so that had gone on for a long time on methadone scripts, you know.
Oh, you've been in the, like, you were getting treatment?
Yeah. I think in total I was on methadone for about 15 years, but I never...
Was prescribed?
Yeah, prescribed. Most of the time. Occasionally the script would get stopped for various reasons and I'd have to try and buy it, but majority was prescribed, but I never stopped using.
What was it, just to think about in my mind is a little bit about the methadone. What was the point of it for you in the situation that you were in, and what did it do for you, or did it give you any aid or help? Did it, I mean, I know what people say it give to them. I'm just wondering, you know, because that was considered, you were in treatment.
So, what did it do?
Did it sort of, because considering it was, back then it was considered you were in treatment.
Yeah.
So that was a treatment. I'm just wondering what positive effect or negative effect did that treatment have for you, do you think?
Well, I guess I didn't learn what I needed to know about addiction until 2014. That's just the truth of it. I didn't, through various reasons, and I didn't understand this allergic reaction that I now know about to substances. And so for me, at the time I was just doing what was advised. I was obviously trying to see drug workers to say, you know, show I was being a good parent and I'm engaging, and most of the time it was what was expected of me to do. So I didn't know that because of this reaction that I have to substances, that it was just going to continue. It wasn't going to make anything better. I guess at points the only good thing about it that was that at points I wasn't a criminal as such. Don't get me wrong. I did my fair share of going out with other people, and, you know, I did what I needed to do. So I was always with partners that were criminals that could get my drugs for me. So that
was where most of the money was coming from, drugs.
Yeah. So where I was getting to was, if at any point my partners at the time were in prison and I'm left like, oh, no, what am I going to do? I had the script as a bit of a backup. But 9 times out of 10, I'd still try and find another way to get my drugs. Mm-hmm. So there'd be small snippets of me just staying on the methadone, but because I was using as well, the methadone.
Just to carry back, I'm just thinking, what would have been the requirement of your partners back then? What would have been on, like, what's them dating sites profile? If you had a dating site profile back then, what would be the top 2 requirements to be your partner?
What would be the 2 requirements? To excel in criminal activity. I'm trying to do it as if it's a CV. To excel in criminal activity. And I'm just thinking, there was my tick box for relationships and the opposite sex back then was very, very twisted. To excel in criminal activity, and strange one, I don't know, I'm sure there's other people out there that share this, and to be strong enough to take care of me, to have muscles, preferably tattoos, but not essential.
And were they all on drugs as well?
Yeah. Do you know what, I had one partner when I had so many people want to try and come in and rescue me and think they could get me clean, and but this one partner, and my eldest was not quite a year, in fact, and I met somebody. I'd done a stint. I went to a mother and baby unit, and I stayed there 6 months, and it was a wonderful place. It really was. The team there was such a loving, you know, team. You know, really good care for the kids, trying to get the mums and kids to interact again and teach how to parent. For me, I think the only thing missing was the 12 steps. But I did 6 months there. My mum thought everything was great. You know, I came out of there, and again, I didn't realise till further down the line that my addiction wasn't just drugs, it was the unhealthy relationships. It was the opposite sex as well. I had problems in that area that needed addressing. But I came out of there, and a friend, a normal friend who wasn't an addict, said, come on, we're going to take you out. So at that point, I thought it was okay for me to drink. I thought, well, I've stopped the heroin now. I'm going to go out and change my identity and go out and be a party girl and spend time with my friends and be normal. So I went out with her and I met somebody, and straight away I'd walked out of the rehab straight into a relationship. That was a massive pattern for me. And he wasn't an addict, and I kind of just really wrecked his life. I stayed with him for quite a while. He tried desperately hard to stop me, and it wasn't enough. And I remember him sitting crying one day and absolutely sobbing, and he'd really grown attached to Taylor, and I'd kind of pushed Taylor on him, and Taylor needs a father figure because her dad didn't ever want to know. And he sat there absolutely sobbing, and he said, I can't do this with you anymore, I'm walking away. And I was heartbroken, but I didn't realise that I wasn't available to any man or any child at that point. So, but he was very muscly, so he fitted one of the criteria, but he wasn't a criminal, and I really did care about him. That was the most normal out of all the relationships, but other than that, all criminals, all drug addicts.
So it's not even just the illegal drugs or the legal ones, but there's also then the relationships that are problematic as well, that all become part of that sort of lifestyle, I guess, of trying to survive and getting through.
Yeah.
With the children as well.
Yeah, and it was filling that void. That the void that was within me, that I needed something to fill that, and I had no self-worth, just absolutely despised myself from an early age, didn't understand that, and I realised that I learned before substances to gain attention from the opposite sex, and that filled something in me. So I think I'm good enough now, because I based everything on what I'm like on the outside. So I'm like, he thinks I'm pretty, so it made me feel better about myself. So that was something that I started to do really early on, and it was one relationship to the next. I couldn't stand on my own 2 feet. I just needed something to make me feel better. Then obviously that wasn't enough, and I found substances which hit a new high, and then it was like the jewel all the way through, really.
So out of all them, you said you did 6 other rehabs. I guess you were getting methadone. Was you go to groups and do stuff to get that, or was it just methadone script? Was you going to any services
in between? What, between the rehabs?
Did you go to any groups or courses or?
Do you know what? I don't really remember. So the first one was when I was 19, and that was paid for by my parents. It was like, we were going to rehab. As soon as I admitted, I think at 18, I told my mum I was a heroin addict. And then I think it was about 19 that I was shipped off to rehab. Lasted 3 weeks and did a runner. I wasn't ready. And then it gets a little bit hazy. I can't really remember before the stints of the other places what the expectations were. But I had to, it was government funded at that point, so I was obviously engaging in something. I really can't remember the in-between bits, but I was linked into the services, and when the children came around, at that point, as I say, my eldest, who's 18 now, nearly 19, I took her to rehab at 3 months old, and there was funding for both of us to go, which was incredible compared to today.
Yeah.
That we had funding to both go for 6 months, so that was an incredible opportunity, and I definitely learned bits and pieces along the way. But again, I can't remember what I had to do to get there. But I think you kind of get fast-tracked slightly if kids are involved.
So what would have been the focus then of a place like that? I'm just trying to think. You've been to 6 rehabs. Was you learning good stuff that you were just sort of rejecting, or do you remember what were you learning about addiction but still wanting to carry on doing it? So I guess people in addiction would know the answer to that, but if somebody's listening that doesn't really understand addiction, they'd wonder why would you go to 6 rehabs? Was you sort of learning, because again, you sort of see people, they learn about addiction, but they think they can get away with it more. What was the driving force to keep going back? You said in one of them you thought you could drink when you come out of there, so that was a bit of a problem that some people have. I guess some people drink, but others, especially heroin addicts, they think they can drink, and it causes them to go back on heroin at some point.
Some rehabs do promote that. If you were on heroin, you can drink, but for me, that just didn't work for me. So I think I can look back now and think that going in at 19, that was my first experience of the 12 steps, which is what has worked for me, and I'm a massive advocate of that today. But at the time, the truth is, and I share this sometimes, is that when I went into this rehab, I was obviously really young. I was only 19. I went in, you had to do the 90 meetings in 90 days, and I would go into these meetings and I would hear the steps being read and I'd think, what a load of crap. How's that going to help me? And I would just scout the room for my next boyfriend.
How old were you then?
19.
See, now, how did you so young, I guess that pops up, what got you on heroin in the first place at that age? What actually started it for you? What introduced you to it?
So, I remember, so at 16 years old, I left home. And this is a crazy thing because the insanity of addiction, because I was into horses, so I spent my childhood riding, show jumping. They were my absolute world, my horses. And when we went to live in a different house while our house was being, we had a new house that was being renovated with more land and more stables for the horses, and it was an exciting time. My mum was really excited about it, and we went to live in an area like temporarily while we had this done. And all I remember is I had this, like, I was a bit of an adrenaline junkie. Anything that was naughty or you weren't allowed to do, or I just got excited over things that, were. So at school, playing up got me. I remember going on an exchange and going on this school trip and being reprimanded by the headmaster when we got back because we got drunk at Oktoberfest and I was 14. But I found it hilarious. I thought it was really funny to get in trouble. Mm-hmm. So when we moved to this house, there was an estate next to it, and my mum said, "You need to stay away from there. You need to stay away from there." And I was like, "I'm not going to do that, am I?" So I started to hang around with the lads that were down there, and I got great excitement out of. And this is something I want to share because, and it was a pattern that came to light coming through ECR, is that there was a pattern of because I felt so crap about myself, any girl that I was envious of or jealous of, and there was lads involved, I'd make a beeline for those lads. And I did it time and time again in my younger years. Like, I'm really envious of you for what you've got. I'm going to go after your fella. Like, kind of unconsciously at the time, it always made me feel better about myself by doing that. Really awful trait, but that's how this started, is that there was a girl at the stables and we'd sit in the tack room giggling about all these stories about these lads, and there was one particular lad, and he was like, it was that toughness, like no one would go near him, they were really scared of him. And I found that really attractive, that he'd been in prison and all that stuff. It was really exciting to me.
Sort of like challenge accepted, that's the naughty one.
Yeah, right, we'll go there. And I had no regard for my friendship with my friend, no regard for the fact that she really liked him. And so that's how that started. And I saw her about 10 years later, and she was a door person, and I said, "I'm so sorry for what I did," even though I was still out there doing what I was doing. And she said, "Kelly, you did me a favour, look at me and look at you." And she was so right, and she's got a wonderful life with children and a settled household, and but that's where it started. So I ended up I decided at 16 years old that I knew how to take on the world. Yeah. And I was leaving home, and I said, "Mum, I'm going to go and live with him on this estate." And his parents were addicted to speed. His brother was a heroin addict, and he was an absolute tearaway. He'd grown up around a lot of domestic violence, and I went off to live there, and I was going to be all right because I knew I knew everything at 16. Wow. And then I went through I had a couple of terminations over 2 years, and it was really hard. There was domestic violence for me, and I didn't cope with any of it very well. And then I spent sort of a good few years running back and forth to him. I could not. It's like that powerlessness again over going back. I just kept going back. This feeling of, this comfort that I got from him was the main thought in everything. It, overrode every single rational thought of, hang on a minute, you're going to go back and this is going to happen again. The same with the drink and drugs. Exactly the same.
Yeah.
So I kept going back.
That sort of love was the addiction in some
Absolutely.
instances. Yeah.
So I kept going back. And so I ended up just picking up. I think I was already dabbling with, I think I'd started cannabis at school to be in the cool crowd. I'd done a little bit of speed out at a few parties, thinking it was great, this life. And it made me feel better than, better about myself and as an equal rather than less than all the time. And it just progressed, and then it was around that particular estate, and you know, and then I absolutely loved it. It just made it, you know, all that hurt, all that pain, all that just discomfort, it just took that away, and then it snowballed very quickly.
So again, I think even listening to your story and knowing your story and lots of other people's, that really it's not even just sort of drugs alone. It really is the chemicals, the relationships that also lead to the children, which is, you know, the normal part of life that anybody wants. But even when you see how integrated into the addiction is the relationships as well. And I think, you know, that'd be interesting just to explore that a little bit more, because, you know, I guess as the years have gone on, you're a little bit clearer of what it was that you were trying to get from the relationships and get from the drugs and living that sort of lifestyle. What was missing in you that attracted you to that kind of lifestyle? Because I guess it was an attraction because you had quite a nice life, you know, like you say, you had your nice house, nice family, riding horses, kind of a nice life, but which you was attracted to, but then something switched, and then you went like a real downgrade. And
do you know what? I'm not sure what.
Because your dad wasn't like that, obviously.
Absolutely not. My dad's a really successful businessman. He's a really good guy with good morals. You know, and absolutely. I mean, he was horrified. So, you know, and same with my mum. Is she was a hard worker and she really took care of us. She loved her kids. There's 4 of us, and she tried so hard for so many years. And the time that she put in with me and my horses and going to all the shows, and I was a spoiled little brat as well. I wasn't very nice to her at all. But I was just never content, and which I hear everybody saying when, you know, there's that discontentment before any of that starts, you know, within my own skin for whatever reason, you know. But I don't know what that switch was. I think that it was unlucky that my first relationship was such a toxic one. I think I might have had a chance to come back from that. Well, who knows? But my first relationship, I fell in love with somebody that was, you know, really, really, bless his heart, poorly with addiction himself. And that was it. That started that road, and that's where the hard drugs came in at that point.
Was you attracted to that side of it as well, do you think? Or, because again, it's like, you know, up to then, you'd probably not seen or been around heroin or anything like that.
No, no idea. Do you know what all I can say is, in that crowd, in that environment, with him, with, you know, that culture, let's say, you know, it was an environment where not many people worked. There was a lot of drugs, you know, there was a lot of there was a lot of poverty, and I felt like I fitted there. So I think I never felt good enough in anybody else's eyes, when actually it was in my own, as growing up. So I never felt like I was going to do enough and do well enough. So I felt like I fitted there, that I was good enough in that environment.
Did you have a lot of expectation on it then, do you think?
Did I have them on myself?
No, from your family. Did you? Because just sort of in my mind, it's like you sort of think that what would be the difference? What would make you feel so much more comfortable in that environment? What was the difference between your sort of nice sort of family background that made you feel so uncomfortable? Did you not feel good enough?
Yeah, I didn't feel good enough. And I don't necessarily, I think when I went through the process of the steps, I think I got a good look at some of the resentments I was carrying, and I don't think the expectations on me were as big as I believed they were. I placed those expectations on myself.
And so, you didn't feel like you were meeting them to create the feeling of not being good enough.
Yep, didn't feel good enough. And I, you know, I did really well. I got 11 GCSEs at school. I was going to go off to college, and I wanted to study law, psychology, funnily enough, and English. And, you know, but I'd already started on the wrong road at that point. I'd already lost my way. So I had these great ideas, but I could never live up to those ideas. There was just no commitment from me. It was too late. And I don't think it was the expectations of my family. They were trying to mould me into being a reasonable member of society, and I went completely the other way.
So I wonder what it was like for them people that were obviously not as educated as you, totally different background. I wonder what it was like for them, you turning up.
Yeah. Don't know. But I did get it in the neck sometimes.
From them?
Yeah, sometimes. Like comments about my upbringing, and I did get it in the neck a little bit.
Yeah.
But I just felt comfortable in that that environment. I just felt like I fitted there.
Yeah, I suppose it kind of felt like the pressure was off a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? And you could just relax into it, and all of a sudden the expectations were lowered, and you didn't feel like you had to necessarily live up to anything in particular.
No, exactly. And I didn't have to be anybody really. I could just mosey along, because I didn't know what I wanted out of life at that point. I just taken the wrong turn, and it went rapidly downhill from there.
So, I mean, that's quite sort of telling, isn't it? That, you know, that somebody that would have just even though it might not be the truth, that somebody would feel like that. So that's sort of almost seeking a lower companionship or a lower self-experience and then feel that's where you actually fitted in, because there was less responsibility, I guess, less pressure, less expectation.
Yeah, the responsibility as well.
Yeah.
Having no responsibility.
Well, you're probably like quite a high functioning person to a degree in that environment, so you probably went, it's almost like going from being the little fish in the big pond to the big fish in the little pond. So there's that, I guess there was that sort of exchange as well.
Yeah.
But again, that highlights I guess there's something going on wrong with your head.
Yeah.
long before, you know, you reach that point of sort of 16 you left home. 16
I left home, yeah.
So, but how long before that do you think that you didn't feel that good enough that you wanted to rebel against the way that was making you feel, that sort of more of a regular family environment?
I remember that all through secondary school, just feeling like that, never fitting in, not knowing my place, playing up a little bit, finding it hilarious to play up, knowing actually I was quite clever and I could have done a lot better than I did. I passed GCSEs, but I didn't want to be the square. You know, I liked to play up. I just found it really exciting, and it kind of filled something in me to be excited about things like that. I didn't being normal and boring, which I love today. That wasn't enough for me. Yeah. So yeah, wasn't enough.
And so then you said, so that led you into that totally different lifestyle, and you said you had 2 terminations.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
From that relationship.
Yeah.
Was that something you wanted, or was that?
One of them was when I was 16, and I remember my mum and my nan sitting me down and saying, "This is a decision for life." Trying to talk them at that point, my partner his mum was a single parent, and they were trying to convince me that I'd be fine and they'd help me and it was going to be great. And this airy fairy world of fantasy, as I went, you know, that continued for many years. The pattern with the children as well. But at that point, it's like, everything will be fine. And it was something that my mum and nan said, and I can't remember. I just thought, I can't do it. I just can't do it. So yeah, I went through that at 16, and then again at 18 with the same partner. Yeah. Yeah.
And how was that? How did you feel about that? Was that, cause that's sort of, I guess for even somebody like older, that's quite a big decision, and I guess all the moral dilemmas of it. And
yeah, it was. I just remember that was very closely linked to hitting the hard drugs. That's the only thing I remember about that whole process, and the turbulence of my relationship with that partner at the time, and accusations that it wasn't his child, just horribleness that came with it. And I just remember
being violent towards you as well. You said
yeah. He was violent. I ended up with broken nose and all sorts, and so it was just a turbulent. So
how was you coping with that? I mean, now you're really coping with some, you know, back before that, I guess you were just coping with hurt feelings, difficult emotions, but now you're having to cope with some real heavy realities that are actually no horses anymore.
No.
Now you're getting abused, being mistreated. And how was you coping with that sort of external stuff going on now? Did that make the inside feel better? It sort of seems, didn't it, that inside you were feeling a little bit more comfortable, even though there's this terrible stuff going on the outside for you.
Yeah, but what I remember about it was that, as I say, it was so like turbulent and so messy at that point that I can't remember how the order of anything really. But I just remember that it made because it got worse, the relationship and the violence, and it made the good bits even better. So when he said sorry and he cried and he was nice to me and that's the bit I was craving from him.
Yeah.
So I put up with that to get to the nice bit. That's it just fulfilled something in me. But at the same time, I must have been in a lot of pain.
It was kind of giving you what you felt you was missing even before any of that was happening.
Yeah.
In your growing up, when you had a lot of nice things, you still had that really uncomfortable.
Yep.
That was still even preferable. Was there any opportunity to go back to your family or back to your old life?
Absolutely. I don't know how many times. You know, we had this lovely house in the country in the middle of 11 acres, and I'd go back. I'd be like, I'm leaving. I'm going to leave him, and I'd go back, and I'd stay, and then I'd end up going back again. Something in me would yield to that to go back. He'd beg me to go back, and I'd go back. So I had a nice new room, you know, in this lovely house, and it was lovely, you know. And my mum wanted to take care of me and welcome me back, and I just kept going back. Just there's something in me that wanted what he could give me, and I think by that time the drugs as well, because that didn't come long after. And then that, you know, the vicious cycle of that. At times I'd step away from him, but then I'd be hanging around with other lads very similar, and then I'd go back to him. It was just really toxic, really, really toxic.
And how long did that go on for?
I can't remember, but a good few years into my 20s. I had my first daughter Taylor when I was 24, and I was still knocking around in that sort of place in Oxfordshire where I'm from at that time. So it was all kind of got a little bit messy. But then this is what I'm saying, the relationships, and when they happened, I went back to another part of Oxford and I got with someone else. That's when I got in trouble with a couple of crimes then. And then I'd go back to him, and it was just really to look back and think, like, you know, the timeline I couldn't tell you because it's all really messy. And at that point I ended up in obviously in the rehab. Then I went to another one in, was it 2000? When was the Twin Towers? 2001?
2011.
2011. Was it?
9/11. No, that was was a month.
September the 11th, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know what year.
Yeah, but I think it was 2001.
Yeah, probably was.
Yeah, I'm sure it was 2001 because I was in a treatment centre then. So I remember that very clearly. That was the next one that I went to. And I was in a treatment centre then. But I just remember it just all is really messy around that time with relationships. And if I wasn't with him, I'd go and find someone else. And then I'd go back to him. And then it just was awful.
So what age would you start heroin? 19?
18.
18?
Yeah. I could have been 17
and then you was in rehab at
by 19. Yeah.
How many other people, because we did a little bit of a talk about young people on drugs these days. Did you meet many other people your age that were doing the heroin and in the treatment centres?
Not that I can remember.
So you'd have been considered quite young?
I was definitely quite young in there. Because it was drugs and alcohol together. There was a lot of older alcoholics, and there was some drug addicts, but I definitely was the youngest in there. Definitely.
And so you spent a fair bit of time in that relationship back and forward. So what finally brought that one to an end?
Where he tried to set me up to get beaten up by somebody, and something switched by another girl for something, and I just literally just walked away.
And then you was off straight away with another guy?
Yep, straight away.
And is that a long term?
That wasn't that long, but I remember trying to detox off the drugs with him. Bless him, he's still out there using. In fact, most of them are. That wasn't that long, but in that time period, I might be missing things, I might be getting a bit wrong here, but it's from what I remember. It's all very, pattern carries on for a long time, but that's when I haven't got many criminal convictions. Like I said, I'm not a criminal. I was doing it with other people. It was lads doing it for me. But that's when I got into trouble for that's when my mum, bless her, my mum put her foot down. I'd been arrested for something to do with burglary, and I was in the court cells, and I was told to stay away from the person who'd done it. I'd done it with my partner, and I couldn't. And we were in this house. It got raided. We were together back in the police station. Went to court, and they said, "Can you get a bail address?" And I said, "Yeah, my mum, no problem." And the solicitor came back downstairs, and she said, "Your mum said no." And I was like, "What?" And it frightened me to death because my mum had never done that before. So she said, "Enough, you're not coming here." And I said, "What happened?" She said, "Well, you'll either be going to prison or a bail hostel." And I'm like, "I can't do prison. I can't do prison." I was hanging around the streets pretending I'm a street girl, and I had no idea. And so I was really devastated about that. So then that relationship came to an end, and it's just a repeating pattern. And then another lad who was a prolific offender, and everyone in the girls loved him. And it's like, well, he's going to be my boyfriend then because all these girls really like him. And then that brought carnage.
What sort of age were they? Were they older than you or around your age?
What's the girls?
The guys.
The guys, yeah, always, sometimes a couple of years younger, sometimes, not often that older than me. Normally about a couple of years or younger or my age. Yeah. So then that happened, and while this one particular one was in prison again, I was like, I can't do this with him anymore, for not realising my part in getting with these sorts of people, what was coming. And then I met Taylor's dad. That was when I was 24.
Oh, and so how did you? He was drugs.
Yeah, all of them. I needed somebody that could help me feed my habit, and somebody who was.
Did you decide to have children then, or was that just a...
No. This is Taylor's dad. I remember sitting in a house with somebody that was a well-known heroin addict, and his mum took me under her wing, and he was chronic, and he's in recovery now. So I'm so proud to say it. But sitting with him, and I was saying about my partner that was in jail, and oh my God, I can't go through this with him anymore. Not able to see my part in any of it at this point. And he said to me, "I've got someone really nice for you to meet." And I was like, "Have you?" And he said, "Yeah, and he's got a job." So I was like, all right then. And that's how I met Taylor's dad. And I wasn't with him very long when I fell pregnant at all. And the insanity of that situation was, this is a thing with children and addiction and the choices and not being able to make sane decisions, is that in my eyes, I'm going to keep the baby because she's going to get me better. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be a great mum. I'm going to stop all the drugs for her, because I didn't understand I couldn't at that point. So that was my thinking at that point. I'm going to go ahead with the pregnancy.
So maybe talk us through that then. How did that work then? So you were doing heroin, methadone by then?
Yeah.
Alcohol?
No, I didn't really ever drink.
Crack?
Yep.
So then how did that happen? You found out you're pregnant.
So in my mind, I'm going to stop all of the drugs. That's it. I'm going to be fine. I can stop it.
Including methadone?
Yeah. Well, so I went to see the midwife, and the midwife said, or this is what I heard, but my mum was a little bit shocked by the way it was worded, was that the crack you need to stop because it can stunt the growth of the baby. So you need to stop the crack, but the heroin won't matter until she's born. If you're using a lot, then she's going to withdraw. So in my eyes, she just told me I can keep using them.
Wow.
So that's what I heard.
Yeah.
So my head was like, well, I'm all right. She just said...
Do you think that's what they said?
No. But that's how I heard it, and that's what I kind of continued to do. And in my eyes, it was better to be on less methadone and just use. And then I was, trying to control my using. So less of this, and if I take the methadone, don't use. And if I use, don't take the methadone. Trying to control it all through my whole pregnancy. I couldn't stop. I just couldn't stop it.
And so Taylor was born addicted?
Taylor was. She very, very mildly. I don't know how.
How do they deal with that?
So, in extreme circumstances, the babies are put in special care and given, I don't know whether it's some form of opiate to calm withdrawals, but thank God none of that didn't happen to any of mine. And I don't know how, because rightfully so, that should have been the case. It was hard to look at that and own that. But they do like a withdrawal chart, so the nurses come round, they know you're on methadone, they come round, they mark certain symptoms in the baby, like sneezing, jitters, certain, and they put them on a score, and thank God her score was really, really low. And I don't know how. That's the truth. I don't know how. So yeah, I was on methadone when she was born, and then they encourage you to carry on trying to breastfeed because you got some of the methadone in the breast milk. So yeah, along came Taylor.
And so, what was your sort of situation in, like housing, and you were in a relationship?
No.
That finished.
Yeah. No, I didn't. We didn't stay together. He had a child with another girl. His ex-girlfriend was pregnant when I was pregnant with Taylor. So Taylor's got an older sister by 5 weeks older, and they're actually in contact today, which is nice. But so no, we didn't stay together. We just didn't. His family thought I was a bad influence on him, not realising that he was just as bad. So I was on my own. I was a single mum, and I went to live with my mum. And I went to we arranged I stayed with my mum for the first bit. She was absolutely amazing. She really was amazing at showing me how to be a mum. And but it wasn't long before I was put in a mother and baby house with some other mums, and things got really bad again. My mum went off to South Africa.
Was you using when you was with your mum?
I think it stopped for in the first little bit. I'd had a cesarean, so I think it stopped. I think it calmed down. Like, as I said, at certain points I could manage a script but it didn't take long for that obsession to go and score to kick back in. So I didn't stay just on the methadone very often, but at points I did. And I think then, from what I remember, I did, because I was quite sore, and I had Taylor, and I was quite kind of distracted by this baby for a little while, but not long, because I remember being in this mother and baby unit, and I was getting drugs in, and I was going off to school, and I had some crazy nut job from my hometown in the car with me, who's well known for smoking lots and lots of crack in the car with me, with my daughter. And I said, you can't smoke that in here, and this is in the middle of the night with her in a carry cot, taking her in a carry cot. And I must have been quite bad quite quickly, because I went off to rehab when she was 3 months old, 3 or 4 months old, back again. Realised I couldn't do it.
And so how many children did you have?
I've got 3.
3. So when did the rest come about?
Pretty much, it's the same scenario. So again, then I kind of, tried my best with Taylor. Then I was trying to find Taylor a dad.
Again, was you wanting more children, or was this just
This was, well, not consciously, no. Taylor, there's a 5-year age gap, 4.5, 5 years between all my kids. So I kind of held it down, not held it down at all, but just with her. But it was the fellas, so it was the men that I was looking for a new relationship. So I met the one I spoke about earlier, the normal one, and then closely followed was somebody that I went to school with, and I just happened to meet up with him again on a night out, and I'm like, oh, and I knew he was a bit of a character, so I'm like, oh, I like you. You're really, really good looking today. And also, one of my best friends was with me, and she really fancied him, so it made it. Yeah, there we go. It was that challenge again. I'm going to get him, and I did, and very quickly he was on a Subutex script, but he was just doing coke, so he was all right in his eyes, and he kind of took Taylor under his wing, and that's, give him his due, because he's not alive anymore. He brought Taylor up, and he really did his best out of all my relationships. There wasn't violence. He trusted me to just go and do what I wanted to do, really. He was like more of a mate, and he did his best to be available for the kids given the situation. I have to give him credit for that. But yeah, and he brought Taylor up, and then I had my second child with him. So
what happened to him?
He died.
Drugs?
Yeah, 2018. He died of an overdose. Yeah. So yeah, that pattern I got with him. Had Morgan, my middle one, who's 14. Same scenario. But funnily enough, just before that, my mum had come round to the house that we live in. I'd done the geographical moved, gone somewhere else. My mum had come up and taken Taylor off me. Said, you're not having her. She needs to come with me, because we weren't coping. This was with Morgan's dad. And my mum took her away. So for a period of about 3 or 4 months, I tried to get a job. I tried to stick to my methadone, and I did for a little while, because I really wanted my daughter back. And I did. And in that time, I fell pregnant with Morgan, so my middle one, and I was still with her dad. And I managed to just stick to the methadone, but not for long. Again, same scenario, just exactly the same behaviour. Didn't stick to my script. Got back on the drugs. Things got messy, and I was doing the geographicals that addicts often do. I was up in this area now.
Trying to change environment, thinking
absolutely, if I just move away, it's everybody else If I just move, it's going to be fine. So I was living up this way because this is where my middle one's dad's family are from. So that's why I'm kind of came up here again at the end. So I came up here and it was all going to be great, and it went to absolute crap. So I moved home. I'm going back. Went back to Oxford with both my girls in tow, with Taylor and with Morgan. Morgan was a baby and Taylor was about 4. Took the carnage with me and was going to go off to rehab again. That was my new plan. Off again.
So you were sort of trying to survive, and having the children was a motivator to try and make the big efforts to try and get clean, get sober, to get it all sorted out.
I really wanted to get better. I really wanted to be a good mum. You know, I really wanted that, but I just couldn't do it.
Well, so again, it's so interesting. There's so many questions, but again, we want to get to the how it started to turn around for you and some of your recovery, because I think it's nice for people to sort of hear that, you know, that how far down you sort of come from, and the journey, and all the hard work, and I guess even all them rehabs, they all kind of add up a little bit to the eventual being able to find the solution for yourself to break free. So
definitely.
So maybe we could talk more about, you know, what started to really change it for you. What was when the big change come?
So I think that the chaos and the drama just got more. There was just more towards the end, and I was exhausted of trying to live this double life. By the time I hit ECR, I had 3 children. I just repeated the same process with my son's dad.
And you were how old then?
How old was I? 34. Was there about 34? Yeah, 34. And going off to rehab, and this is the thing, I'd got into relationships in most of the treatment centres I'd been in, which had distracted me. Like you said about learning stuff along the way at treatment centres, I think I could have learned a lot more, but I was so busy finding new partners and
sneaking around.
And that's exactly what I did with my son's dad. I met him in a detox. So my son is now 9, so he was 1 when I got into recovery, and by that point I think that...
Did you get pregnant in the rehab?
No.
Well, that happens.
Could have done, but I didn't. No, I didn't. But the powerlessness around that is very prevalent in my mind, is you know, being in a detox, meeting my son's dad, just the same cycles, prolific offender, and I was just in awe of him. He was quite a big guy, you know, and I was trod over somebody to get to him as well. Same pattern all the way through. And when we'd come out, we agreed to meet, and I was obsessed. It was that obsession that you get with the drugs, exactly the same way with him, the obsession. And we'd arranged to meet, and my mum, lover, had done my house out for my 2 girls, and she'd completely redecorated the whole house, and it was going to be great. And definition of insanity, doing the same things over and over, expecting different results. This had been done before, but my mum had given it her all, and you know, I even went off and had an implant after the detox to stop me using heroin. No understanding of the 12 steps at this point. Although I'd frequented quite a lot of meetings by then. And so I remember going into this house, and it was going to be great, and I had the implant, and I was going to do so well in my ideas. And I remember arranging for him to come over and see me. And I remember he'd walk towards my door, and as soon as I looked in his eyes, and I could see he'd used or taken prescription drugs, I think at the time. And I had nothing in me to go, hang on a minute, you are not coming in this door and ruining my life. You know, you're not. It's not happening. I couldn't do it. It was the powerlessness. I was like, in he comes. So, and then that carnage carried on, and then I fell pregnant with Jaden. And I remember my dad standing in the kitchen of my house and just said, my dad doesn't swear, but he did on this occasion, when I told him I was pregnant with my son, with Jaden, and he just said, you've had 2 kids with 2 complete idiots, and you're effing doing it again. And then my dad, and I was like, but again, that full flight from reality, because in my mind, this was going to be different. He was going to stop going in and out of prison. We were going to be this happy family. He was going to raise my girls. My girls loved him. And that was the problem with these relationships in and out of my kids' lives, is that they're building attachments to people. No stability. My girls were coming up to prison with me to visit him, you know, and for my daughter, where my eldest is now, it's incredible for the fact that she was involved with, you know, the police, and she'd been up to prisons, and just where she is now, and I'll get to that at the end. But so they were kind of dragged along in my relationship. So the drugs and my relationships were more important than my kids. So by the end, I had my son. My son was born early, and I just was absolutely shattered, absolutely tired. I couldn't do it anymore. And I ended up back in this part of the country because I was on the run from my relationship, because it turned quite nasty. Never physically violent, but there was a lot of other things, and it was the stalking, the harassment, and it just got very messy because the drugs were still involved, and the police hanging outside my house, and just carnage. So my middle one's dad said, come up here, get a break, get away, just come up here. And I stayed, and I did what I did before, and pleaded to go to rehab. I was in a refuge, I was placed in a refuge, and I was like, I need to go to rehab, I need to go to rehab, I need to go to rehab, I've got to go to rehab. And in my mind, I was going to repeat what I'd done before, take my son to rehab with me, and the girls would go with their nans, and I'd get better, and we'd all come back together, and it would be great. So that's how I ended up at ECR. And with a pending court case, because by that time they'd said the thankfully, and this is the problem, I think, is that on my journey with my children, the knowledge of addiction within the social services that I came across was very, very low. And I really managed to pull the wool over their eyes so many times, and the children should have gone way before they did. So I put on this front that everything was great, and it was everyone else's fault, and I'd blame my partners completely. It's his fault, you know, and they stayed with me way too long. So, but thankfully I had this fantastic worker up in Great Yarmouth, fantastic. She was on it. She knew my behaviour. She knew what I was doing. She knew I was lying. She knew I was faking my tests. And then everything started closing in on me, and I was in this refuge, and basically social services were on top of me in Norfolk, and they were like, this has got to stop. You've got to stop contacting your son's dad, which even though I was in a refuge from him, I couldn't, because I had a big part in that as well, and I couldn't stop using drugs. So they passed me this piece of paper and said, if you don't do this, you're going to lose the kids. And I just couldn't. And I was like, I've got to go to rehab, I've got to go. I was trying desperately to save it, desperately to keep my kids, and and then I ended up
getting going to rehab part of the manipulation, do you think?
Yes,
or
definitely.
It wasn't real any intention. He just knew that if you did that, they'd get off your back for a little while.
Yeah, and I'd get a bit of relief, and it was almost a break from trying to be an addict parent, from trying to hold down a drug addict.
Then they'd almost do everything to give you a chance. Yeah. Do you flat, sort you out.
Yeah, to do exactly what I'd done before, which is look what I'm doing. Look, I'm going to rehab. Everything's going to be fine. Look, I'm going to be great. I'm going to, that, and I didn't.
So what happened then? What was it you think that made the difference?
The information that I was given this time. Or was I ready to hear it? I was. There was no other options. It was at that point that there was nothing else left to try. But I think I landed in the right place.
What was the information that you think that you heard that was different?
An understanding of addiction I'd never heard before, that explained me to a T. The way this allergy, I love that. My allergic reaction to substances, that I don't respond the same as those that can recreationally use. Stick something in me and I don't know when that's going to end. And the stuff around the brain, and understanding the brain, how my brain's laid out, and it was just a relief to be given some factual information. And you were there, and our lovely Sonia, and it was just looking at you guys. There was something that you guys, there was something in you that, and it was the love as well. Like, I felt like people didn't want anything from me for the first time ever, and they're like, look, come on, we're going to show you the way out. We're going to show you what we know, and it just, my ears were definitely open, although along the way I still played up. I wasn't like I said in the beginning, the model client by any means.
But that's kind of who you'd become as well. I guess I find that a lot, that even the people that want to change, they don't know how to change, and it's not always easy to change. It's a bit of a journey.
Yeah. That
people have to be willing to go on. There's no, people just want to think, well, just stop using drugs and it'll all be fine, but it's not as easy as that, because you've become something that takes some time to redevelop?
I got an opportunity to really, I just, the process of the steps, it's an incredible journey. I think the good thing about it got broken down to make it very simple, because my brain was fried, and reading them as they are laid out, there's a lot of people are like, I'm not doing that, don't understand it, don't go near it, and it's such a shame. But I was given the opportunity to have it broken down into layman's terms, and it was like, okay. And there was people around me breaking it down all the time, and it was like, I don't really understand that. And I just knew that the more I did it, the more things changed. I got the opportunity to really look at my part in my whole life, to look at my behaviour, the way that I was thinking, and my twisted perception of reality, all the sayings in the big book. It's like, it was just me. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not an alcoholic. And it's like, well, change the word alcohol to drugs. We're talking about addiction. As soon as I did that, I'm like, wow. And
I think so. Like Matt was saying at the beginning about the altered attitudes. It's like, because again, it's trying to wrestle that idea off of people that this isn't a drug or alcohol problem. So even the name alcoholic or addict is a bad name, because it gives people the impression that it is the drugs and alcohol's the problem. Not there's a mental condition existing underneath all of that. That is actually generating it and making it difficult for people to make better choices. And until that mental condition's addressed on the inside, because like you said earlier in your story, didn't it, your problem was on the inside long before you got a drug or a relationship on the outside.
Yeah.
But then you start going outside to try and resolve what's going on. No matter how chaotic and abusive it is, it's still preferable than what you're experiencing on the inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the relationships are a good example of the fact that it doesn't have to be a drug or an alcohol.
Just anything that gets you out of yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely not. And absolutely not anything that gets me away from how I feel internally.
From the mental condition.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Like you say, this isn't even about the drink and drugs. They've just become the solution. That's the tip of the iceberg, and that's where people get stuck, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not using now.
Well, I think that's a lot of the services were kind of like, if they just stop you using.
Yeah.
So then all them other treatments and support that you may have needed to achieve that really weren't there in the past.
And so I guess that whole process has allowed me to understand myself firstly, and then to grow in every area of my life, because I've learned that I'm selfish, self-centered by nature. Everything is about me, and it has been my whole life. This spoiled little brat, and to try and live my days where it's not about me, it's about others. And to the parenting thing, that is a real challenge, to learn, because I firstly had to own my role as a parent in addiction, and the fact that I wasn't a mother, and the fact that I did emotionally neglect my kid, and to understand why I did that and how that played out for them. So I had to then take some responsibility. I had to own it, be honest about it, accept it, understand why it was that way. I loved my kids, and I've heard, I think Sonia say it about passing a lie detector about the love for my kids. I loved them with all my heart, but that wasn't enough to stop me. So it wasn't that, but it was, understanding, like I say, what I suffered with, that I'm really selfish and self-centered, and then turning that around to learn to be a mum. So learning where I went wrong and how I don't want to be. So what have I got to do? At the same time, I've got 3 children who are facing the consequences of my addiction because of the choices that I made. Like my eldest doesn't even know her dad. The man that brought her and her sister up has died from an overdose. And my son's dad has got into recovery but lives a long way away from my son. So that's had an impact on his relationship with him. And, they've suffered childhood trauma. So to own that's quite big. But I'm trying to work on that today, so I'm not only trying to deal with myself as a mum and learn how to be a mum, which I have to lean on other people that are mums in recovery to do that. I'm trying to help them through there.
But how long have you been in recovery now?
8 and a bit years.
So, at the beginning, you obviously didn't have your children, you were living in that little room from that other, was it Stars, was it?
Yeah.
So you were sort of in there, trying to work, trying to get your life back, always aiming at trying to get back to being a mum, getting your children back. So tell us a little bit about that journey and what that entailed for you, what you've had to sort of go through in recovery. Because again, when we look at you are now, that you're a working mum, you've got a nice house, you've got your kids. You know, there's some nice success stories amongst all of that, but that didn't just happen either, did it? There's there's quite a lot of battles and still is difficulties on the way. So maybe talk a little bit about that and how you've managed to achieve it.
Yeah, I guess that I stuck around good people. I stuck around those that had gone before me, you know, and stuck close to those that I could confide in, that would guide me through, you know, recovery from the very beginning. And it's that addicts want everything now. I want it now. I want it all to change now. But I'm clean now. It should be all right now. And it was like I kept hearing it's a process. It's a process. It's a process. And it's like it so has been a process, and I've had to have the patience. So everything about me, the impatience, all of that, you know, the selfishness, I've had to try and turn it round, and I've just had to do it one step at a time, you know. And I think it's having those people, because there's one thing that you'd always said to me, and I absolutely love this, and I never forget this, is that I created the deficit in the lives of my children. I love this. Some of his sayings are great, but this particular one, it's like I took from my children. I took their childhood, you know, I took so much from them growing up, not on purpose, not intentionally, because of my addiction. So making amends to my children to put that right is I've got to put back, I've got to give as a mum would give anyway, and more to create, you know, because of the deficit of what I took away. And that always stuck with me. It's like, I've got to work hard at this. I owe them that, you know, and it's just...
You kind of owe it to yourself as well, because that makes you better mum, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because again, even observing on the outside, you still had to deal with trauma in recovery. You know, you still struggle like with, really is a mental condition, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very lows, lot of doubts, insecurities.
Yeah.
You know, days when you just think it's all gone wrong, you failed.
Yeah.
But still never picked up the drug.
Never.
Probably did some of the relationship stuff still to a degree.
Yeah.
You know, made a lot of mistakes, but still didn't go back to the drugs. Still carried on. When you get knocked down, you got up and keep trying and keep pushing forward.
Yeah, I've gritted my teeth and got through it, and it's been recovery's been a journey, and there's been a lot, like you say, the trauma, a lot of painful things, losing my mum, the girls losing their dad, but by sticking close to the program, sticking close to what I've been taught, sticking close to people, I acknowledge I've got this mental condition, and I'm just trying to improve myself on a daily basis, you know, with it, and as time's gone on, I'm getting better in better areas, but I want to continue to do better, and I want to grow, and, you know, I'm up for the challenges. I've kind of, you know, another saying of yours is there's always going to be a mountain. It's just about climbing that, you know, and enjoying the bits in between, because that's life. So I feel like I've got the ability to manage with myself better, but also to invest in my children, because I've had really good role models around me, and I know I can't do it alone. I never want to have to try and do it alone, because I'd never do it. So I've had to get through. You still have your bad days, and some challenges. But would you say you suffer less now? I'd say so. Yeah, I'd say so.
You've got the tools to cope with those.
I've got the tools, and I can't cope with the uncomfortableness of not using those tools for very long. No. I kind of like, I can. Yeah, I think I do pretty well. I'm a single mum. I'm not in a relationship today because I got it so badly wrong, and I don't want to invest in that area till I can make better choices. Yeah. And to be comfortable in my own skin, I think I'm setting a good example for my girls. I just try. I want them to see. I want them to look up to me, and think I want to be like that when I'm older. So I want to set a good example, and I try and behave. I try and live my life by that, and I try and work hard and teach them a work ethic and listen to them. And be there for them, and they know how important my recovery is to me. So yeah, that's what I try and do. But I definitely suffer less. I have a lot less drama in my life today. I try, and I don't want drama. I try and keep it as drama free as possible.
But that's improving, I guess, because now you can see that you really redevelop your mind.
Yeah.
and really done a lot of work.
Yeah.
So the addiction, that mental part of that mental illness we called addiction wrongly, that you really managed to get on top of that and stop that being such a prevalent part of your life. So, which for me is a sign that you've redeveloped a lot of new neural pathways that support the life that you want to live now.
Absolutely.
You're not
Absolutely.
completely subject to that bondage of that mental torment thinking that needs to be drugged to get relief from it.
I feel like I can make quite sane decisions around things, and that's the bit I really like, is that I wouldn't think for 1 second.
Yeah, as a mother.
Yeah.
Or as a woman.
As a mother, definitely.
Yeah.
It's like I now, it's like going through the girls losing their dad, I had the ability to make it about them and be there for them, and I wouldn't let any man walk in my house. I wouldn't, it would, the tick list of what I want out of a relationship is very, very different, because I'm not going to put my children through any of that ever again. You know, I want to make healthier choices for their sake as well as mine. And I've got the ability to do that. So I'm like, okay, I'll sit here till that happens, and I'll make I can take my time. I've learned so much about how not to do it. Yeah. You know, and I can support my children. It's amazing. You know, my eldest, and as I mentioned it earlier, through all the trauma and everything, she's now worked really hard, and she's only 18, and she's now gone off and joined the police force. and it was her dream from the age of 11 to do that, based on having been around the police officers a lot and in the you know, and for her to go and do that despite the trauma, and she definitely is traumatized. You can see it in certain behaviours of hers, but I've got the ability through what I've learned to kind of be there for her now. But I still have to lean on everybody else to, not everybody else, but I've got certain few people to help me. I'm never going to not do that, because I'm not going to risk losing what I've got. So I know that because of the mental condition, left on my own in my own head for too long without working my programme and staying connected, I can go back to starting to have silly, my thinking can go a little bit twisted, but not to the degree it was 8.5 years ago. Yeah. So I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. And
I think that's such a testament to that idea of recovery as possible and altered attitudes, because obviously you had that same cycle over and over again. And it did get broken eventually. You just had to hear the right words at the right time, go to the right place, and be in the right mind state to accept it and to hear those words. But you can break that cycle. Which is
and hopefully with the children as well, because you've had that opportunity to put a ton of energy and mothering and parenting and back into their lives and being there for them and helping them deal with their problems. Because I think you can help them process whatever's going on for them, which never would have happened if you didn't learn how to process yourself. Because ultimately that's kind of like the issue, is that you never really learned how to process.
No. Today, the most wonderful thing is that they know what's coming day to day, pretty much, with me. Stability, security, consistency, availability.
And even when they go out into the world, they come back or get on the phone when they got a problem to speak to their mum.
Yeah, they do. And they and that's the thing I've always said. I said, I don't care how cross I am at you, for anything you do, there's nothing you can't tell me. And there's always a bed and some food here, always. Because
some good advice.
Yeah, bed and food.
And not a lot of judgment.
No, try not to. Who am I to judge after my story?
Well, that's the good thing about it. I think that is something, because again, you probably agree that even if you go through them sort of horrific stories in life and you do overcome it, it can make you a better person, because it does make you more compassionate, more caring, more understanding.
Definitely.
Being able to empathise with people, be more willing to probably step out and reach out and help people where other people may not, or may even frighten them a bit more. So,
and I've got a soft spot for kids, mums, kids, and I know that there's a stigma because of social services. Mums are frightened, and anybody I come across that's suffering, that's got kids, I've just my heart, I'm like, I really want you to get this, because you can do it.
It's one of the reasons we wanted to do this, I think, and probably going to do more of them, because we realise that either through, now being a treatment advisor, I guess that's. Do you want to say a little bit about your job?
Yeah, so my job is I speak to families and people suffering with addiction all day in my role, and I try and find ways and means to get treatment that suits each person. So, you know, all day long I'm speaking to loved ones of people that are suffering, I'm speaking to people that are suffering with addiction, trying to find some sort of treatment, trying to get them out of the darkness, really, just, you know, however I can. So,
and it is apparent by that how little help there is for children, and, you know, parents with children that are in them very deep places. It seems
hard.
a lot of support, I think, but very little real understanding or help of how to redevelop them. People have got this mental condition.
Yeah, definitely lack of understanding.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story today, Kelly. And for
Thank
anybody,
you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome back anytime. And for anybody that's listening, you know, as Kelly just touched on there, you are one of our treatment advisors. You know, so if you call ECR or you contact us on the live chat website,
Rehabs UK
or Rehabs UK, then, you know, you can speak to Kelly. And if you're a mum out there who's struggling, or, you know, you just need somebody to talk to about these things, we do offer free consultations. So just give us a call. Don't hesitate, because, you know, I'm sure you want to help as many people as possible now.
Yeah, just pick up the phone. I've said this before on another video. Please just pick up the phone. Let's just talk. Doesn't have to go any further. Just let's have a talk and go from there.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening today, and thank you, both of you, for being here, and Kelly again for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for
God
having me.
bless.